Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this IFST webinar on nutrient density in foods, past, present and future. My name's Kate Halliwell and I'm going to be your chair today. I'm the head of UK Diet and Health Policy at the Food and Drink Federation, and I'm also a council member representing industry at the Nutrition Society. As always, with these events, which are organised by the IFST's Food Science and Nutrition Group, we're going to be looking at a topic from both a nutrition and a food technology perspective, and highlighting how important an understanding of both aspects often is. For those of you that are regular attendees, these events do usually run as evening sessions. We're going to try and keep the same format, although we are going to have to forgo the wine, nibbles and chat for obvious reasons. What we are going to have is a set of short 5-minute presentations followed by approximately 40 minutes of Q&A. So really the questions and the interaction that we have is really critical to the success of this event. And so I would encourage you to ask questions and make comments throughout the webinars as the presentations are ongoing using the Q&A function, which you will find at the bottom of your screen. So on to today's topic. It's one that I'm really excited about actually. So nutrient density in foods, past, present and future. For me, that's really getting to the heart of the benefit of having nutritionists and food technologists working together, understanding what's important, understanding what's possible, and looking at how we can get the most nutritional benefit out of the foods that we eat. As always, we have a fantastic lineup of speakers for you. Their biographies are available on the IFST website, but to give you a little flavour of what's coming up, first of all, we have Jenny Walton. Jenny leads on food partnerships and commercialisation at Harvest Plus, and she's going to be looking at biofortification and changes in food over time, and that's going to have a particular focus on agriculture. Jenny will be followed by Mike Adams, who is Product Innovation Lead at Camden BRI, and Mike's presentation is going to look at food processing and the impacts that that can have on micronutrients. And finally, we have Eva Lewis, who is Head of Food Innovation at Devonish. And Eva's going to be looking at how micronutrient supplementation in animal foods can actually follow on through and have an impact on human health. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you across to Jenny.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you all for listening in, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today about changes in food over time. I'm going to focus on changes, and importantly the required changes in the world's most commonly consumed foods, or the staples of our diet. And I hope you can all see a slide with 2 carrots. Throughout history, humans have changed and sometimes improved nutrition by selecting crops for specific and desired traits. Carrots used to be white, and over time we switched over to orange carrots, and that's partly because the colour looks better and they taste better, but importantly, orange carrots have almost 75% more beta-carotene than they did 25 years ago. Agriculture, the foods that are grown, are the base of our diet, and to a large extent you can process foods using today's modern technology, but foods, grains and plants that we start with are the most critical part of the food system. Because of cultures, climate, agricultural policies and tradition, 60% of the calories we consume today come from 3 grains, so that's wheat, maize and rice. So 300,000 edible species out there, 150 to 200 are used by humans, but 3 are the main calorie contributor. And this varies enormously depending on where you live and where you live in the world and how much money you have. But these major staples are what the world's poorest rely on and generally grow at home and then sell the surplus to local markets. More than 2 billion people suffer from micronutrient deficiencies. That's nearly a quarter of the world's population. And most of these are in low and middle income countries. But as we all know, micronutrient deficiencies can coexist with obesity. In low and middle income countries, malnutrition exists generally because of a lack of dietary diversity. And many of these people rely on homegrown foods and local food systems, which are very narrow in diversity, a real lack of fruit and vegetables, meat, fish, and eggs and dairy, which are still often unaffordable to many. So to combat micronutrient deficiencies, there are four major interventions. Dietary diversity, the perfect solution, but as we work towards that until we live in that perfect world, there is supplementation with pills or powders or drops like vitamin A. There is large-scale food fortification and biofortification, and this is where agriculture and Harvest Plus come in. So biofortification, or increasingly known simply as nutrient-enriched crops, is the use of conventional breeding techniques to increase the nutrient density of vitamin A, iron or zinc. And these are the three nutrients of the world's biggest nutrients of concern. And in order to be an effective intervention, there can be no penalty for using biofortified varieties. The yield is competitive, if not better, the seeds and inputs are the same, and even better, many varieties are climate smart and drought tolerant. So I mentioned that the population rely on, in general, on wheat, rice and maize as the major staples, but the other main grains of the food system are beans, millets, sweet potato and cassava. And to date, through the Harvest Plus program and our partners, we've reached over 42 million people in Africa, Asia and Latin America. And one of the major investments is vitamin A orange maize, naturally high in beta carotene, and it's the beta carotene that gives the grain its amazing vibrant orange colour. Why isn't the nutrient delivery of these foods good enough? And to a large part, this is because the agricultural research community has generally prioritised calories or food volume over nutrient quality. Generally, yield is the number one most important factor when breeding or for a farmer when choosing their seeds. And this has inadvertently led to a decreasing nutrient density of many crops. And what can be said is that nutrition factors are rarely a priority in crop breeding, and the food industry in general are not demanding that food commodities meet set basic micronutrient targets. Climate change is now a major problem with an impact on the nutrient status of foods. Climate change is affecting micronutrient density and protein content, which will only exacerbate food insecurity in regions that are already grappling with large-scale hunger and malnutrition. Research has shown that the combination of higher concentrations of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and related high temperatures depletes the protein and nutrient content, including iron and zinc in plants. A warming climate poses a direct nutritional threat to the billions of people who rely on staple crops for most of their diet. So who is Harvest Plus? So we are a non-profit, donor-funded organisation. Our head office is in Washington, D.C., and we are housed in the International Food Policy Research Institute, and we are part of the global CG agricultural research programme. We are the development and delivery organisation for biofortified seeds, crops, grains and foods. We exist to be part of the solution to reduce hidden hunger in the most hard-to-reach, vulnerable people. So these are generally smallholder farming families who have little or no access to big formal food systems, so no access to dietary diversity or supplementation or food fortification. And we believe that the plants that people are already eating should do the work. We make the foods that people eat the most of more nutritious through plant breeding. This is a one-time investment that will sustain for generations to come. I started with the example of white carrots. No one remembers them. At Harvest Plus, our vision is a generation to come that does not remember white maize. Global forecasts predict that by 2050 there will be enough calories to feed the world, but there will not be enough nutrients to nourish the population. We need a multi-themed action plan that's not necessary to not only ensure that calorie intake is balanced to avoid both stunting and obesity, but the foods that are consumed contain enough micronutrients. Improving the nutrient content of the basic staples and building micronutrient targets into international food policies is essential to maintain pace with climate change, and that's even before we can continue with our global efforts to end malnutrition in all of its form. That's the end of my presentation, and I welcome your questions in the Q&A and any times afterwards if you would like to contact me. And I'll now hand over to Mike from Camden.
Thanks, Jenny, and thank you for the introduction, Kate. My name is Mike Adams, and I'm the Product Innovation Lead for Camden BRI, and I'm going to talk about the impact that processing has on nutrient density and some of the work that Camden BRI has been involved in, which is helping to improve some of the issues. First of all, I'd like to start by talking about why we process foods. Processed foods have received a lot of bad press over the few years, but it's important to remember that processing of foods delivers a number of benefits. Arguably, the most important of these benefits is safety. Thermal processing has been part of human society for a significant period of time, due mainly to the fact that it reduces the chance of serious illness from pathogens present in the food chain. Additionally, processing of food can improve quality, improve the nutritional profile and digestibility, and make unpalatable foods much tastier, as well as allowing us to store them for a longer period of time and therefore transport them longer distances. Whilst it is generally believed that processing has a negative effect on micronutrients, I wanted to highlight a couple of instances where processing actually has a positive effect on micronutrients. Lycopene, whilst not a vitamin, has significant evidence showing its health benefits, and is much more easily absorbed from canned tomatoes than fresh, due to the rupture of structures from thermal processing during canning. Frozen fruits and vegetables have been repeatedly shown to retain higher levels of vitamins compared with their fresh counterparts, due to losses over storage at ambient conditions. And thermal processing of legumes and some cereals has been shown to reduce the level of anti-nutrients, such as phytic acid and lectins, that can chelate minerals and prevent the absorption of iron, zinc, calcium, and other minerals. However, as is widely known, processing can also lead to a significant loss of vitamins and minerals. I've highlighted a couple of examples. Vitamin C is degraded during process by exposure to oxygen. This, as with most reactions, occurs much faster at a higher temperature. So juicing and heat processing orange juice can lead to a significant loss in vitamin C. A number of B vitamins are also highly sensitive to both oxidative and thermal decomposition. And finally, during a number of processes, such as the production of white wheat flour, nutrient-dense portions of foods are removed and discarded. This is done primarily to improve the quality of the food, both in terms of its organoleptic properties, as well as, in a number of cases, removing compounds that impact the shelf life of food. Significant work has been done across the food and drink industry to try and overcome some of the challenges highlighted in the previous slide, as well as others I haven't covered. I highlighted 4 areas that have demonstrated that new or different processes can help improve the nutrient density of foods. King's College London, along with Camden BRI and a number of other partners, have examined the possibility of micromilling wheat to improve the availability of minerals. Whilst wheat is high in zinc and iron, most of this is bound within components of wheat that are poorly digested. This means that the availability of the mineral is poor. This project showed that physically disrupting these structures can improve availability. Non-thermal processes, such as high-pressure processing of juices, has been shown to reduce the level of vitamin loss by allowing safe juice to be made without increasing the temperature. This process utilises pressures 6 times higher than found at the bottom of the Marianas Trench to inactivate pathogenic organisms. The renaissance of some ancient processes, such as fermentation and sprouting of seeds and grains, and the research being conducted, is beginning to show that they can lead to some significant benefits in terms of both levels and availability of micronutrients within foods. This is in addition to other benefits, such as gut health. Finally, a process which has a direct effect on micronutrient levels is the UV treatment of organisms from the fungi kingdom. Both mushrooms and yeast have been shown to increase their level of vitamin D significantly when exposed to direct UV light. This has led to the launch of a number of mushroom products to the market with significant vitamin D levels compared with conventional mushrooms. Additionally, UV treatment of yeasted bread could also benefit. To summarise, not all processing is bad. It allows us to create, store, and consume high-quality, delicious foods that we may otherwise not be able to consume. Given harvest periods and growing locations, it simply would not be possible to consume some of the foods we do in this country without processing. However, whilst this is true, some processing does have a significant impact on micronutrient density, and it is something that industry and academia are working on to improve. Thank you. Now, I'd like to hand you over to Eva to talk about supplementation in animal nutrition.
Many thanks, Mike. As you've already heard, my name is Eva Lewis and I'm Head of Food Innovation with Devonish. Devonish is an animal nutrition company and we produce high quality nutritional products that ensure the most effective and efficient utilisation of nutrients in the production of meat, milk and eggs. Within the Food Innovation Department, we're focused very much on bioenrichment, and what this means is that we look to the animal's diet and their management system as a way to getting the animal to produce more of a certain nutrient in their meat, milk and eggs. So I suppose it's a very natural process because we're looking for the animal to naturally produce that nutrient as a result of the inputs that we've put into their diet. Throughout the course of the next few minutes, I'm going to talk through how we decide what nutrients to focus on next. And I'm going to use the example of Omega Pro, which is our nutritional solution for achieving omega-3 enriched chicken and eggs. So in summary, or in cartoon form, we are what we eat eats. I suppose as consumers, we are very careful about the products that we pick up off the shelf. And within Devonish, we are very careful that the diet of the animal is really achieving optimal performance, health, welfare, but also achieving a really nutritious end product in terms of the meat, milk or eggs. This very much reflects our One Health from Soil to Society focus. As I said, I think the focus of this few minutes presentation is about how we decide what nutrients to focus on. And really the first question that we pose ourselves is this nutrient at a suboptimal level in large numbers of people right around the world? Taking the example of omega-3, this is a map of the world and it shows the status of consumers as regards omega-3 as measured by their omega-3 index. So this really is a measure of the circulating EPA and DHA in your blood. You can see from this map that very few countries are coloured in green, where people have optimal omega-3 status. Most of the countries are coloured in red and orange, which indicates people with suboptimal omega-3 index or suboptimal omega-3 status. This very low circulating level of EPA and DHA puts people in the high risk category. And it's worth noting that the omega-3 index or your circulating EPA and DHA is a direct reflection of the EPA and DHA that you've consumed in your diet. The second question then that we pose ourselves is, well, is this nutrient really of importance or of benefit to human health? And again, taking the example of the omega-3 fatty acids, and in particular these EPA and DHA fatty acids, we can see from the slide that there's quite a list of benefits from consuming these fatty acids. I've indicated 3 in particular with a red circle, and these are the attributes that we see called out in the European Nutrition and Health Claims Regulations. So they specifically say that the fatty acid DHA contributes to the maintenance of normal heart, brain and vision function. If we look beyond that European legislation at the scientific literature in general, we see increasing numbers of health benefits attributed to the consumption of the correct levels of omega-3 fatty acids. Among them, immune function, mood, prevention against Alzheimer's, etc. The final question then is is it biologically feasible to actually alter the meat, milk and egg nutritional profile? And what we did from an omega-3 perspective was we would carry out some desktop research and also some actual trials. And in this case, it indicated to us that yes, it was biologically feasible. In other words, we could look at adding a nutritional solution into the diet, and the animal would then utilize that to express higher levels of omega-3 in their meat, milk and eggs. And so at that point, we've answered those 3 key questions, and it's then time for us to design our research program. And our research program is all about getting to the point where we know exactly which raw material to use, at exactly which point in the animal's life, for how long, and at what level. And we need to obviously have that information. We need to understand the variability from animal to animal, from portion to portion. We also need to understand the implications of cooking for the levels that we are measuring. Of course, we need to understand what the effects are for the consumer's eating experience and for the shelf life of the product. And finally, we need to be very clear on the implications for the bird's performance and their health and welfare. As I said, we very much follow this One Health approach. So we want to see, a more nutritious product for consumers, but produced in a way that benefits the health of the animal and also the health and sustainability of our world. And then finally, and I think this is maybe something that's quite unique to ourselves, we have taken the viewpoint that all of this research gets us the information that our meat, milk and eggs are enriched in a particular nutrient. The question then is that nutrient actually bioavailable when a consumer consumes it? So we have then gone ahead to the next level and done human intervention studies. In this case, in the example that I'm using of Omega Pro and used in the production of omega-3 chicken and eggs, included in a consumer's diet, and looking at the effects then on their circulating levels of EPA and DHA. So that's just a quick run through the approach we take from an animal perspective in creating nutritionally enriched products. I'd like to now hand you back to Kate, who will guide us through the questions and answer session. Thanks very much.
That's great. Thanks so much, Eva. And also obviously to Mike and to Jenny. So we're going to move in to the Q&A. I see that quite a few people have already put questions in, which is great. One of the things that I was thinking or struck me as people were speaking is that I think Eva certainly mentioned how this was a natural input. Mike talked about how processing sometimes had some negative connotations. Jenny's obviously also talked about it being through natural breeding techniques. So it seems to me that seems to be coming across, that although we're talking about fortifications of foods or different ways of getting nutrients in, that seems to be an important element of how the consumer perceives that they're getting those. And that kind of also led me on to wondering about labelling. Jenny, I just wonder if you could pick up, is there any specific requirements around labelling of products for the biofortifications that you were talking about?
Oh, good question. And because the breeding techniques that we use at Harvest Plus are conventional, so they've been around for generations, there are no specific labeling requirements for the end benefit of biofortification. So if you end up with a product that is naturally higher in vitamin A, iron or zinc, you can make health claims around it, so nutrition and content claims if you hit the right levels, but you don't have to label why or how the food has actually ended up with that sort of naturally higher content of the vitamins and minerals.
Right, okay, yeah, no, that makes sense. And I was also thinking around, Mike, you were talking a little bit in your presentation about availability of certain micronutrients. And I just wondered if you could expand a little bit around kind of that term and why it's important.
Thanks, Kate. That's a great question. I noticed that Jenny talked about it as well in her presentation. So bioavailability is a really important concept in nutrition. Unfortunately, all of the micronutrients that we eat don't always become available for us to utilize in our body. So often you'll hear the terms bioaccessibility and bioavailability used when you talk about certainly minerals. And that means that just because a food has on the label that it contains, say, 10 milligrams of iron per serving, that doesn't mean that your body will extract 10 milligrams of iron when you eat the food. Unfortunately, due to the effect that both the food matrix and the type of mineral that is contained within the food have, it does mean that in some cases an awful lot of that mineral can go straight through your body without actually being absorbed. A great example of this is the iron supplementation that's used in a number of food products, certainly in the UK. It's often elemental irons, that is literally iron filings that are used. Very fine dust, so it's not going to hurt your teeth or cause you any discomfort, but the bioavailability of elemental iron can be incredibly poor. And it means that although you think you're getting a good source of iron, your body isn't actually absorbing it. And it's a rather serious issue that I know is being looked at in terms of how we can improve the bioavailability and also ensure that people aren't thinking that they're consuming lots of minerals but not actually getting the benefit.
Yeah, of course, that's really key, isn't it? You don't want people thinking they've got a better diet than they have, I guess. And actually, there's a question here on, it's another kind of clarification one, I guess, but aimed at Eva. Eva, within your presentation, you talked around omega-3, long-chain omega-3, DHA, EHA. I noticed perfect on your slide as well. I just wondered if you could just kind of clarify the differences between those and why they're important into the diet.
Yes, Kate, thanks. So there are really three long-chain omega-3 fatty acids. We have ALA, which is really plant-sourced. So we find it in linseed, grass-fed beef and milk, etc. And then we have the two longer chain marine-derived omega-3 fatty acids, which are EPA and DHA. As I said, they are marine-derived, so we really, traditionally have only got them from oily fish. And they are the ones that have a particularly, I suppose, strong, health claims around them, even reflected in the European Nutrition and Health Claims Regulations. So they are the ones that are, really at this, below optimal level globally. And they are the ones that we in particular are focusing on. So it's looking at getting those marine-derived, very long-chain EPA and DHA into products other than oily fish, because a lot of people don't like to eat oily fish. So it's about giving consumers choice.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly here in the UK, our oily fish intakes are incredibly low. There's a couple here they're kind of opposite each other, but I think we can group them together and really aimed at Mike. So somebody has asked if there are particular, so around the kind of nutrients that are most likely to be lost through processing. So where should we have that kind of focus? And someone else has asked, is there a particular processing method which is better in order to keep nutrient retention?
Okay, great questions. I mean, it's difficult to generalize about the loss of micronutrients during processing because they are all lost by slightly different methods. You've got the two distinctions that I made of they're lost as due to something like the thermal process, and they're lost because the portion of the food that they're contained in is removed. I'll address probably the incidental loss, that is during heating and processing. I'd say that the main vitamins it's mainly vitamins that are lost during that process. Minerals tend to be fairly heat stable, and you're really looking at kind of the B vitamins. As I said, some of those are incredibly delicate and will be lost very easily as soon as temperatures increase. And as I said, vitamin C. The there's a bit of a misconception about vitamin C. It's often thought of as heat labile, so it's lost as an action of an increase in temperature. But if it's heated in an oxygen-free environment, it's actually quite stable, and loss of vitamin C is almost entirely due to oxidation rather than thermal. In terms of what the ideal process is, again, it varies by vitamin to vitamin, mineral to mineral. Generally, you can say vitamins are best retained at lower temperatures. Minerals are slightly more complex. They don't tend to be lost during processing, but I talked about anti-nutrients. So, things like phytic acid and lectins, which are found in things like beans and cereals, they often need a thermal process or even a fermentation step, as you find in a lot of products that they contain, to degrade those anti-nutrients, and that frees up the minerals and allows them to be much more bioavailable. Again, not affecting the total amount of mineral as kind of found in a lab, but it means your body can use a lot more of it. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work going on non-thermal preservation technologies, and a lot of that is based on the fact that they will tend to retain more vitamins in the finished food.
Yeah, okay. Jenny, one definitely here for you around the opportunities in biofortification, specifically into the UK.
Yeah, definitely. And what I'd say is that sort of Harvest Plus and biofortification are very much open for business and open for commercialization. Obviously, nutrient deficiencies do vary very much, and whilst people aren't dropping dead of malnutrition in the UK, there certainly exists certain subgroups and populations who would benefit from sort of large-scale biofortification. But also consumers are motivated by natural sources of vitamins and minerals, and are interested in the food composition and where the food comes from, and the nutritional delivery of plants themselves. There aren't any of the sort of Harvest Plus varieties available in the UK, but some of the grains that we do work on, so for example, rice and beans are available to be imported to the UK. And we are working with several researchers and research establishments in the UK about bringing biofortified varieties to the UK, and also engaged in several conversations with manufacturers and retailers who are really interested in biofortification. Like orange maize is, it's really interesting, not just because of the beta carotene content, just because of the actual color. It's really innovative, and it's consumers are interesting in it, especially around sort of barbecue season and wanting something a little bit different. So whilst it's not sort of mainstreamed into the UK food system, it's most definitely available, and consumer research that we've carried out in the UK shows that the UK consumer is very interested in it.
Yeah, it's interesting actually. I saw recently some purple cauliflower. I don't quite know what that had been, why it was purple, but it did make me stop and kind of go, oh, I must try that. That looks different. So there's one here. It's aimed at Jenny, but I think Eva, it might be interesting if you picked it up as well. So the question is around how much work has been done to look into consumer acceptance of biofortified foods, and is there evidence that effectively, back to what I was saying at the beginning, actually, do consumers prefer that kind of idea that it's a natural option rather than just fortifying? So, and then I guess carrying that across to you, Eva, would be, have you got information about the consumer reaction in terms of, say, eggs with an omega claim? Jenny, do you want to kick that off?
Yes, yeah, sure, and a really good question. I think the term biofortification it's terrible, and if we could start all over again, we'd come up with something else. What the research that we found, whether you do the research in the UK or Uganda, consumers don't like the word biofortification, and we would never use it. And what we do recommend, and what we found from the consumer research, just tell the consumer about the end benefit. So it's naturally high in iron, or it's natural source of vitamin A. That's all consumers need to know. And then in terms of sort of natural occurring vitamins versus fortification, Fortification, is an excellent solution in terms of malnutrition, in globally, and the legislation in place that actually dictates what we should fortify food with. But there are an increasing element of consumers globally who want cleaner labels, and unfortunately don't understand or don't appreciate that some of the nutrients that are added in through fortification are perfectly safe and very good for your health. So they might even avoid fortification or avoid labels that you see with different ingredients in that they think are bad. So biofortification or naturally occurring nutrition is a sort of antidote to that consumer rejection of increased ingredients on the nutrition panel. And we just sort of advise manufacturers and retailers just to say sort of natural source of the nutrient.
Sorry, Kate, I suppose just to come in there, echoing what Jenny said, I suppose we very much focus on the end point, and the nutrition and health claim from a European legislation perspective that's associated with the nutrient that we're looking at. And that's very much the way we would focus from an omega-3 perspective, promoting that heart-brain vision, and likewise with other nutrients. So as well as, are people suboptimal, can we actually do it biologically, and what can we actually say on the label about that nutrient, and does that really resonate with consumers, in a very kind of easy to understand way. So that's very much the way we would the way we would approach it.
Yeah, and kind of, I guess, sticking a little bit with the consumer. There's a question here. It's particularly to Mike, so I'll let you kick it off, Mike, and then the others can come in if they want to. And it's around processing and the fact that does seem to have real negative associations for consumers, or certainly for some consumers. Have you got any views about how we might help kind of change that mindset and help them to understand some of the benefits and indeed some of the nutrient benefits that can lead to?
Yeah, it's a really interesting area, Kate. There is a lot of press around processed foods, and as I said in my presentation, not all, some of it is deserved. So, processing and highly processed foods are generally not as good for you, because either nutrients are stripped out during the manufacture of the ingredients, or they're lost during the processing. But processing of food is, it's been with us for 1.8 million years since man first learned to cook, and a woman first learned to cook foods on a fire, and it's that has played a significant part in the history of humankind. And I think it's important that education of the public, not just about processing, but about other important matters, including accurate nutrition advice, is both very important and very difficult. Certainly, in today's world of fast news, headline-grabbing studies like the NOVA study out of Brazil around the impact of highly processed food on kind of global obesity, grabs attention quickly, but doesn't offer a huge amount of solutions. Whereas, it's important to remember that processing plays a key part in ensuring we have a balanced diet. We wouldn't be able to eat a lot of certainly the fruits and vegetables that we eat in this country if it wasn't for processing, because they wouldn't have a long enough shelf life to be transported here. How we communicate that to the public is difficult. They're quite complex arguments. It's quite a complicated subject, and we're constantly discovering things. As with all science, there aren't very many settled points. There's still a lot of discussion within the industry about some of the evidence that we have. So how we communicate that to the public is very difficult, but I think it's important for all manufacturers of foods to ensure that they understand the benefits that their processing has, so they can communicate it to the public directly. And certainly in the UK, I don't know about other countries, education regarding food technology in schools is certainly something that I think needs to be worked on. But that's maybe something for another Q&A session.
That could be a whole new webinar in terms of advertising, educating our future generations. Jenny, Eva, have you got anything you want to add on to that one?
I think the education piece is actually really interesting and really important. You know, certainly from our perspective, we're an animal nutrition company, but we actually do an awful lot of work, you know, talking to different groups about the importance of omega-3 nutrition, and particularly EPA and DHA. You know, we're involved in schools projects and talking to, you know, various, you know, farmer groups, etc., etc. And I think, you know, as well as us maybe pushing, you know, things and innovations into the market, you know, we of course need a pull as well of people looking for those nutrients. And that will only happen when people are really when people really understand, you know, how important these various nutrients are. Omega-3 is one, you know, and there are plenty of others, vitamin D, you know, as Mike mentioned, and various others. So I think that's, you know, it's a hugely important area.
Okay, great. There's a question here around costs. So both in terms of biofortification and bioenrichment. And does that add cost into the food that the final consumer is buying? And I guess therefore linking through potentially to widening inequalities and not reducing them down. Jenny, do you want to come in on that first?
Yes, and really good question, because I think there's an automatic assumption that when you add value, you add cost, and biofortification does have added value. In the case of the biofortification that we work on, the actual R&D costs of the biofortification has been donor funded, so we are funded through UK government, through UK aid, but also Gates Foundation and other governments around the world, and they have shouldered the cost of the crop breeding, which takes a very long time and is fairly expensive. So when the actual seeds, grains and foods then get to market, then they are the same price as the sort of standard variety. Our main target and of the Harvest Plus organisation is very low income consumers who are suffering from micronutrient malnutrition. So if the foods that were on the market were more expensive, then we wouldn't be very successful straight away. The foods and grains that we produce have to be the same price, if not cheaper. But at the same time, there is also a market for added value foods that are more expensive. What we don't want to see is that biofortification becomes sort of food for the poor people, because, you know, nobody wants to be eating poor people's foods. So there should also be a market for added value premium products that are naturally high in nutrition or biofortified, to have that sort of aspirational pull in the market. But yeah, I can't emphasize enough that the seeds and grains that we produce through our program are the same, if not cheaper than the standard variety.
From an animal product perspective, generally with something that's been added to the diet, yes, there's an associated cost with that. So for example, the omega-3 products are a little bit above standard when you're in the supermarket or whatever. You know, on the chicken side of things, they were above standard but below, for example, free range. So that's the kind of price point. I think it's interesting as well, though, that this is very much the start, you know, on the omega-3 enriched food side. And obviously, the more we can, you know, the more products we can make available, then the more cost effective everything becomes, both from a producing perspective and a processing perspective. And the other thing is that I think the science is moving on, you know, really quickly in this area. So, you know, we look at new raw materials, the new efficacy of raw materials coming through, you know, production processes for those raw materials. And each of those steps gets you to, you know, to a better price point in terms of production and for the customer. I suppose the other way of looking at this, there was a very nice modeling paper from the US where they looked at subsidizing fruit and veg in the US. And they looked at the cost effectiveness of that, and it was hugely cost effective at a government or a policy level to subsidise, healthy foods in terms of the payback in terms of health, and then the reduced costs from a kind of an economic and a government perspective. So that's something that we're very much looking into as well. So that, you have a kind of a consumer-led option, but maybe there are other options at a more, kind of national or kind of a national level. That's a really good way of, boosting the health of an entire population.
Yeah, and I think, as is often the way, that whole having the strategies that interlink across kind of consumer-led, government-led, industry buy-in, obviously, is a way of moving things along more quickly. There's been quite a bit of interest on omega-3, I have to say, on the questions. So including someone who was asking why we can't get it into chocolate spread in the hope then that children might actually eat it. I think an interesting one is around impact in terms of flavour. And certainly I can remember, although this is a few years back now, that there was a certain level where you could add it in through animal feed, but then there was a kind of fishiness that came through, and that's obviously problematic. So I was just wondering if you, I assume you do kind of sensory testing with consumers and try and look to how you might bring that down.
Yeah, so I suppose, the main thing to note there, actually, it's can be a raw material issue. So traditionally, going back a few years, all of your omega-3 enrichment, and this is EPA, DHA, so it's very long chain, would have been fish oil derived. The only alternative to fish oil is algal oil. And actually, from Devonish perspective, that is the route we have gone down, is the algal oil route, because from a sustainability perspective, really. You also, though, do get a lot less taint issues using those algal raw materials rather than the fish raw materials. So I suppose that's the first thing to note, is that actually your choice of raw material can really have a significant impact there. And the second thing, obviously, one of my slides, I had, a big long list of the things that we have to consider in terms of when to include it in the animal's diet, for how long, at what level. And that would be, number one, to achieve the target level that we want to achieve, but number two, without incurring any negatives, including taste, including shelf life issues, etc. And correct, we do taste panel analysis, etc., etc. And obviously, any of the products that we've brought do not have any issues like that. And in fact, some of the feedback, and a lot of the feedback we got on the chicken side of things, was to do with repeat buying. So I suppose initial purchase would be on the on the health side of things, but actually that a lot of the repeat buying was on succulents and meat quality. So actually, there's some alternative positives coming out of the enrichment program as well.
Yeah. Okay. Just going to move us along into probably our penultimate question, because we're running out of time. On to Mike again, or back to Mike, I should say. Someone has, and this is quite wide-ranging actually, what are the low-hanging fruits are available in terms of food processing systems that would help support micronutrient retention, or, in a best-case scenario, even increase the micronutrient levels?
Oh, yeah. How long's a piece of string? That is a really good question. I mean, low-hanging fruit in the food and drink industry is never seems to be, it can appear low-hanging, but there's usually a reason it hasn't been implemented. I mean, the one thing to be said about, certainly staple food and drinks is they are very low-margin commoditized products. And often the market, certainly for those commoditized products, won't often sustain a cost increase in terms of processing. And often with new technologies, there can be significant capital requirements in order to purchase equipment. Pasteurization of milk, for example, has been a standard for a number of years. Louis Pasteur invented it quite a while ago. It's a very mature technology, and the cost of implementing it is very low. Whereas if you look at high pressure processing, the cost of that, there are significant benefits in terms of cost in use of high pressure processing is much lower, but the capital requirements to buy a high pressure processing rig is measured normally in millions of pounds. So it's not something that your average bottler of milk would think of putting in, because the payback period is going to be significant. In terms of other low-hanging, interesting fruit, I mean, I mentioned the renaissance of fermentation and sprouting. I mean, these are technologies that are hardly new, but both show really interesting effects on micronutrient levels. We've had a project at Camden running over the past couple of years looking at sprouting as a technology, and we've demonstrated working with King's College London that sprouting and fermentation both lead to increased availability of minerals, and the literature certainly indicates that there can be a significant increase in vitamins during sprouting of things like wheat and other crops. And now that, again, that's not a simple process to implement because there's significant food safety challenges, but they are low-hanging fruit in that they are technologies that are fairly well understood. But the challenge is, as I say, weighing up the often nutritional and safety concerns go hand in hand. You can make things very safe, but you often lose nutrients, or you can try and retain some of the nutrients, but then you tend to have to process them less, which can have an impact on safety and shelf life. So often balancing those two as well as cost and productivity are why low-hanging fruit maybe aren't plucked, shall we say.
Yeah, it's interesting actually, isn't it, that balance between a safe food supply chain and a nutritious one, and how we make sure we strike that balance. Just one last question. I'm going to put it to you all, but ask you all to be very brief. And actually it kind of comes back to labelling, which we started with, but it's around how do we raise consumers' awareness so that they're aware of how important micronutrients are, and around how nutrient dense a food might be. And then, alongside that is the current labelling legislation. We'll have to take that as in the UK. I think, although Jenny, feel free to chuck in some stuff from the US. Is the current labelling legislation adequate in order to support consumers to make those choices?
Yeah, I suppose just one quick comment on that, Kate. I think, something that we're interested in seeing is the labelling at the moment is very much around the nutrients that are bad for you, and we would like maybe to see something included on labels highlighting, this is a source of something that is good for you. So I think that's one simple thing which maybe could be considered.
We talked about availability of vitamins and minerals. It's difficult because whilst the lab testing shows you what is in it, it doesn't show how available it is to the consumer. But unfortunately, that is impacted not just by the food matrix itself, it's impacted by what the consumer ate for the meal before, what time of day it is, what the temperature is that they're living in. So it's very difficult to alter from the current labelling of it contains X milligrams of iron to what would actually be available for the consumer. And I think it should be made clear to consumers that most nutrition labelling should be used as a comparative tool between foods rather than as definitive information on how that food will affect you. Because the more we learn about the digestive process and the gut, the more we're beginning to realise that what you find in the lab bears often little resemblance to how that food actually behaves in your body.
I suppose just to add to Eva's point, that it's some kind of system around positive nutrition signposting. So there's so much negative nutrition discussion, fat, sugar, salt reduction, and traffic lights and that kind of thing. It would be really nice to see a system that easily points out to a consumer that a food is nutritionally dense, and it has got a lot of added benefits in terms of micronutrients. It's a very difficult conversation to have with consumers, especially bioavailability. So just through simple ways to just make the food nutrition debate more positive and signpost to consumers very easily that a food has got some positive benefits.
Yeah, and certainly on some of the questions that we're not unfortunately going to have time to get to, bioavailability, and what it actually means into the diet has come up a few times. So there were questions around things like, what should you consume with what? So, if you have orange juice, does that help the iron absorption? Those kinds of questions, as well as things around, is there an impact on the eggs, omega content once you cook them, and therefore are there specific instructions that retailers are giving in terms of how well you should cook your eggs? These may well be things that come your way after the webinar ends. So we are unfortunately at time because we have got so many questions still. So I'm very sorry for those of you who asked questions that we did not get time to answer. I would like to thank our speakers, Jenny, Mike and Eva, for what were really interesting presentations to start with, and by the level of questions we've got, clearly stimulated a lot of thought, and well, it would be debate if we were in person. If we didn't get to your question, then, or indeed if you think of something else that you would like to ask, our speaker contact details are there, and they have all said that they are willing to take questions after the event. So do feel free to use the emails that are displayed there. I also just wanted to remind you that there are lots of great resources on the IFST website, including a COVID-19 knowledge hub. So please do take a look at that. Thank you once again for attending, and to our speakers, and good afternoon.